Okay, we're good.
Cool.
All right. So this is the end of semester final interview. I will be interviewing Madisyn. Please, I'm sorry, I stated your name for you, but please state your name, major, year, and where you're from.
My name's Madisyn Carroll. I'm a freshman at Ball State, graduating in 2024. I'm majoring in fine art education with a minor in American Sign Language, and I'm from Trenton, Ohio.
Don't know how. Okay, very nice. So first question off the bat, how did you end up in Bartlett's Honors 199 class?
It's actually kind of funny. I was talking with my advisor about like my schedule and everything for the fall semester over the summer, and she mentioned the class, and it sounded interesting. I've always had kind of like a strong relationship with race and uh, just the topic in general. Um, and I was intrigued by the notion of having a class that's discussion based and about that. Um, so I took it, and then like I was reading like the syllabus and everything when it was posted, and I actually got like a little discouraged just a little bit because I was scared that my upbringing was gonna like show a lot and people were gonna like judge me
Mm-hmm.
because like I was raised by a very racist family and I've never agreed with them, but I always have like this subconscious like fear that I still radiate that energy, or that like I have like traits that show that
Mm-hmm.
upbringing. Um, so I was like kind of worried about it, but I ended up sticking with it, and I'm really glad I did.
Yeah, that's interesting for sure. I don't think you're alone in that subconscious fear. I just listening to people like present, a lot of them would like preface with, "Well, my family doesn't see it this way," and I think that's interesting. I think that actually makes the class a lot better, getting those kind of like perspective, like people that have like close relationships with people that don't agree with them. I think it's very important. Um, so you kind of talked about like what drew you to it and stuff like that. Would you say that your family like background and whatnot that almost like influenced your decision to take that class, just to like in general, or would you just say like you would have been interested either way?
I feel like my family background definitely was a big part of it, mostly because I try to educate myself on any subject um, on my own and not just like rely on hearsay or even like certain newscasts about it. And the idea of having a class that was going to teach me more about a topic that I would very frequently debate with my family was like appealing, because then I knew that one, it would educate me further, and then I would have more like ammunition basically to combat what their ideals and comments were going to be on anything related to the protests, the riots, police brutality, all of the like big events that have happened this year.
Exactly, that's a good point. Did you find it was easier to have these kind of conversations on Zoom, or do you think you would have been better suited to like have them in person?
I
Like,
feel like me
I'm sorry, like with regards to like this kind of content, not just, I'm sorry if I didn't clarify on that, but like this class specifically.
I think it would have been a bit easier in person just because I feel like with Zoom, there's kind of some talking over, and then it's difficult to let it be known, like, hey, I want to jump in. Where, and in like a classroom setting or in person setting, if you want to jump in, you can like raise your hand, or you can like do any body position that like shows like when you like sit up in your chair a little bit and like lean in, that shows like, hey, I want to interject. And those type of body language cues are lost through Zoom, I think, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
um, so I feel like just in that case it would have been easier in person. And since it is such a deep concept and even like a touchy one, it would be easier to get like read body language and like the facial expressions of people easier. So then if you say something that could be taken offensively, but you don't mean it offensively, it would be easier to note like, oh, she's not saying it like I perceived her saying it through the camera.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we talked about it when you interviewed me, but like that was one of the reasons like participation for me. I don't know about you, but like that was why I was like hesitant at sometimes. It just doesn't seem like it's not natural to interject when you don't like make it known that you want to. Like if you just butt in,
Yeah.
I feel like that makes it difficult. And when such serious conversations are going on, I thought it was a little like just weird to be doing that. So that's why I asked that question. So you said you're from Trenton, Ohio. Now, just for my own understanding, is that like central of the state, east side, west side?
It's close to Cincinnati, if you know where Cincinnati is.
Okay,
So
yeah.
it's more southern,
So it's close to
like,
Indiana, kind of.
yeah.
Okay.
So it's like southwest Ohio.
Hmm.
Um, it's about an hour from Kentucky and hour from Indiana if you get on the right highway.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
So with that in mind, what was Trenton, Ohio like, or your neighborhood like growing up?
When I was growing up, I I got a lot of like impact from my family, and then as I got older, I realized how much the town itself was very much the same. Um, my grandpa specifically and his side of the family uh, are very racist. They're very bigoted, misogynistic, like the works. Um, and that's just I hate saying, well, that's just how they're raised because like I was raised the same way and I'm not like that, but that is how they were raised. When he was a kid, there was a fence that separated the white people from the people of color. And so it was basically engraved in his brain like they are lesser than us. Um, so he would always make snide remarks or comments, um, called them very inappropriate names. The N word was something I was exposed to very early on, and that kind of thing. So I always had this like knowledge of race and how it was perceived by them. And I'm just glad like my mom did a pretty good job of being like, yeah, that's how he was raised. We don't say stuff like that. Like it's not okay. Um, but even herself had some like biases. She still, even today, because I would talk to her about this class, thinks that there's no difference between a family of color and a white family buying a house. They have equal opportunity and it's just as easy for them and it's just as easy to get a job and all of those things as it is for a white family. So there's definitely a lot of bias in my town, and there's not much diversity at all. My class alone was 376 people, and I remember there being 3 people of color in my class, I think. Maybe like 3 to 5,
Okay.
probably. So definitely not much diversity at all. And the town of Trenton and the surrounding town next door, 7 Mile, they're the same. Everybody in Trenton, you can throw a rock and you will hit a Trump sign. And my town's the bait, like the textbook like scenario of I follow everything Trump says. I don't want to wear a mask because you're stealing my rights. All of it. Like our county sheriff even made like a public announcement when the mask mandate came out that he did not agree with it, and his police officers were not going to be enforcing it because he's not the masked police. So that whole, like, this whole area that I'm in is very, very different than even Ball State. Like,
Yeah.
it's just like a whole different feel.
That's such a dangerous mindset with like the masks. I know that's off top, but I had to mention that. It's crazy. So I know it's like a short period of time from like growing up to like now, but have you seen any change in acting, or do you think anything could change in Trenton, Ohio, given time?
I feel like right now there's too many people that have these mindsets for there to be real change. There's definitely a lot more people, especially after like the protests and the mask situation, stepping up and being like, hey guys, you're kind of being ignorant right now. Um, so I do see hope for change. Um, Probably not anytime soon, though. Hate to say it, but like probably when the older generation kind of dies out,
Yeah.
then there'll be more change because it's my town. I don't want to say it's full of old people, but it's definitely there's definitely a lot of older people that live in my town. Like, I don't know. You know how like some towns it's just like there's old people everywhere?
Yeah.
That's kind of how my town is. It's not a bunch of like young adults and like newlyweds or anything. It's mostly a quiet, older people type town.
Yeah, I feel you. You had mentioned you would talk about this class specifically with your mom, like growing up, talking to other family members as well, if that ever took place. Did you ever have conversations regarding like race, and like if you could like describe those, or like give an adjective to describe it, like what would you say those conversations were like?
Yeah, for sure. I know my mom, my dad, and my grandpa were the three that mainly conversations about race would come up. Um, they all three are biased in their own ways. So, like with my mom talking about it was more like trying to explain why her like views were skewed, why they were incorrect. Where talking with my grandpa was like talking to a brick wall about why it was a brick wall. Um, he just he has a mindset of he's not racist because, in his words, some of them are good. And that alone, that comment alone, is a racist comment.
Yeah.
Um, so, like, talking with him was basically just a losing battle of me trying to be like, hey, like, you probably shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
Like, it's very rude. And my dad, he was like a mixture of both of them because he doesn't have like in his words any problems with people of color, but he is very strong-willed of like no I can't think of what it's called, like a white woman with a person of like a man of color marrying each other, or like interracial marriaging.
For sure.
That's
Yeah.
that's the word I was trying to find there. He's very against all of that. He doesn't think it's right. Um, and I'm just I it's hard because I want so much for them to understand why they're wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm the type of person when I start talking about something and they say something like that, I get flustered and I can't think of like anything to say. Like basically everything I learned will just like go out of my head because I just get angry that they think that that's okay to say. Um, so it's definitely very tense conversation. And most of the time now I'll just like make a snide remark, or they'll even comment before saying something. I know you won't like this. And I'm just like, well, if you know I don't like it, don't say
I'll
it.
say it. Yeah, for sure. You had talked about some like examples of like what it was like growing up in Trenton? For like you said, the N word was very common. Was there
Mhm.
anything like a specific instance that you can recall that like you thought, wow, like that's actually racism, like right there, like in your community?
I know when I was in high school, I didn't I didn't witness it myself, but I was at school when it happened and like everybody was talking about it. My biology teacher actually, he shouldn't be a teacher. I don't know how he hasn't been fired. Um, but one of his students who was a person of color broke their arm and like had like, like the forearm cast and everything. And since I wasn't there, it is hearsay, but apparently he made a comment asking the kid what he's going to do now that his cotton picking arm is broken.
Oh my God, yeah, that's that would qualify as a racist incident in my book as well. That is
Yeah, I was
horrible.
like, how do you get away with that? Like,
Yeah, that's
you
bad.
don't you don't say stuff like that.
Um, yeah, for real, that's that might
Yeah, I
that's
heard
pretty
that and I
tough.
was like completely like baffled. I was like, and he's like still a teacher?
Yeah, no, that makes no sense. Get him out of there for
He's a
real.
college professor too
Oh,
at
for real.
night.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's he has if that's the case, he's influencing a lot of students he sees both high school and college. That's yeah, he needs to get out of there
Yeah.
for sure.
Oh yeah.
Um, so in terms of like other identities such as like gender, class, religion, how do you think those types of identities shape your experience in terms of race?
I definitely think that um, gender specifically is a big one that influences me. Um, and I know it's one of those situations where I was brought up told this, so then like I think it, but then I realize like, well, that's not like true. Um, it's one of those things where it's like what you think first is what you're told to think, and what you think second is what you actually think. So like my first thought is like about men of color. Growing up, I was always told they would beat women, that they would treat you poorly, that they would use you, that they would rape you. Like all these horrible things about men of color. So I have this like subconscious thought sometimes where I'm like, is that man gonna hurt me? And then I'm like, I wouldn't think that if he was white. That's not good. Like I don't need to think like that. So I'm trying to like rewire those hardwired thoughts
Mhm.
from my childhood basically to make it so I don't have these biased opinions and um, racist ideals basically. And I think this class has definitely helped me realize like that's not true.
Yeah.
It's not how it's gonna be. And it's allowed me to have like the strength as well as like the education to be able to tell myself, oh, I just thought that. I thought that because it's what I've been told, but what I've been told is wrong. And that thought is wrong. It's not factual, I guess would
Mhm.
be the word that I'm looking for. So gender in that case is pretty strong with race. Um, Everything else I feel like it's involved a little bit, but not it doesn't stand out as much as like I could give you like a specific example like I could with gender.
Mhm.
Um, I do know, like I was always told, women of color, they would more like feisty, uh, but they could cook.
Yeah.
So that's like the assumption that I think is very common to like women of color are great cooks. And I remember that one um, article, I think it was, that we had to read of why people need to listen to women of color.
Yeah.
She even mentioned it in there. Like, if people listen to women of color in the kitchen, their food would taste better.
Yeah.
Um, so just like some of those biases and I keep saying biases, and I feel like that's not the right word that I'm trying to look for, but
Um, like stereotypes.
stereotypes. Yeah, that's a better word. Those stereotypes, I would say I have heard and think frequently, even though like I know they're stereotypes. That's what they are.
Yeah.
Not everyone is a part of them.
Yeah. That kind of relates. We did that one activity with like the mom memes, and we had to like
Oh yeah.
generate stereotypes, and like you just said, like cooking or making food taste better. Like that was one of the prominent ones. And I wanted to ask you to get your opinion on this. Growing up with the background you did, do you think it would? Oh, okay, that's a weird way to say it. Do you think like it's a challenge? Like regardless, okay, let's say you didn't take this class. Would it have been challenging to fight those stereotypes like in your own mind? Like, do you think like you said that this class has helped you like understand like that's just not how it is, but for someone that wouldn't
Yeah.
have taken this class, do you think it would have been like a serious challenge for them to actually like overcome those kind of stereotypes?
I definitely think it would be harder for sure. I know, like some of the friends that I chose to hang with in like middle school and high school definitely had a big impact as well, like how their family raised them. So it was like everyone in my family, for the most part, just let it happen. Even if they didn't agree with it, they wouldn't speak up, they wouldn't say anything, they would just sit there, let it happen, and then move on.
Mm-hmm.
So it was definitely a lot of my mom pointing out things that were blatantly wrong. And like she had to explain to us that like we couldn't just go say the N word, that that's not allowed, that Papa is old is like the thing that she would always say. He's just old, and that's what they used to say, but we can't say it. So in that aspect, I already had like a little bit of like help, but for sure this class has definitely made it a lot easier to think about, especially with like microaggressions. um, I, like you said when I interviewed you, didn't really know what it meant for sure. Like I knew you weren't supposed to do it, and I knew it was related to race, but I didn't know for sure. Like I couldn't say, oh, that was a microaggression. um, so that was definitely a big thing that this class has helped me realize. Like I would think something, and then it would be like I was able to acknowledge before speaking, like, you don't, like, that's a microaggression.
Mm-hmm.
um, that's probably the biggest thing that this class has helped me with.
For sure, I can relate to that. Kind of a tough transition, but in terms of race in 2020, how do you think the events that took place, in terms of COVID, you had the presidential election and lots of other devastating things in 2020. How do you think all that plays into the conversation on race? And do you think, it's going to do you think we took a good step forward this year?
I think with the election, the riots, the marches, the police brutality, all of it, if you look at it as a whole, you would just see a whole bunch of negative. But if you think about it, if none of that stuff would have happened, no one would be trying to make a change. Well, not as many people. There's always going to be somebody, but not as many people would be standing up and actively speaking out for people and trying to activate change. Um, with the election, I definitely think the protests and COVID, and all of the police brutality cases had a huge impact on the outcome of the election, just with how President Trump handled all of those situations. He made a mockery of himself, in my opinion. And it really showed, like, hey, we need some real change right now. Like, we can't keep going the way we're going. It's not going to work anymore. Um, which I think is definitely the first step in going towards a better way of thinking and a better America. And definitely settling for Joe Biden. I don't think he's going to do too much. I think he's going to start to. Um, Unfortunately, I don't think he's going to even live long enough for his term.
Yeah.
Uh, he just, so I'm hoping that what he does get started is going to snowball and like with people realizing like, hey, maybe he's on to something to keep that change growing, which I think is the best part of 2020. It's one of those little things where it's like there's so many wrong, but like look at this, like this wouldn't have happened if
Yeah.
XYZ didn't happen.
100%.
Yeah.
That's no, I like the takeaway you had. Like the 2020 was terrible, but like look at this. This was
Yeah.
decent, you know? So like that's always a good perspective to have. Um we talked about the protests and the marches and the rallies and whatnot. So were you able to partake in any of those in terms of like COVID? Was there any restrictions, or were you able to like did you attend any rallies or anything like that?
I briefly went to the one that we had on campus, but before that, I wasn't able to go to any in person. I donated some money to a few Black Lives Matter organizations, and I know a few of my friends that were able to attend, and they live streamed it. So I was like there, but
Yeah.
through a screen, because my mom was worried about COVID as well as like it getting violent. And I have a little sister and she works, she's a nurse. So it was one of those situations where it was like, if I got COVID, it would be more detrimental
Yeah.
than anything. So I respected that and didn't attend any, even though I'm 18 and could have if I wanted to.
Mhm.
But I definitely wanted to attend some
Yeah, I
for
get you.
sure.
My family had the same, hesitations in terms of the virus, and I understand that for a lot of people. It's a scary thing. It's affecting a lot of people, and you got to be smart about it for sure. In terms of other participation, you said you're 18, obviously. Were you able to vote this year?
I was able to vote, yes.
I I I wanted to mention this in my interview. I'll just say it now, but like I think one thing that could change is like voter. I don't know, how do I say this?
Participation.
Yeah, participation. There's a lot of what is the word that I'm like? I'll just explain it because like I didn't go home to vote. I was at Ball State, so I'm like, got to fill out the absentee ballot. So I wanted to get my mail-in ballot. I ordered it end of September, and it was November 3rd is the election, right? So I didn't get anything in the mail. I couldn't come home, so I don't have a car campus. So I wasn't able to go home to vote in person. So I'm like, all right, guess I'm just not voting this year because it never came. November 2nd, day before the election, I checked my mailbox. I checked it every day from September to November. It came the day before the election, and I'm like, well, it doesn't even matter. Like, I'm not gonna be able to ship this out.
Hmm.
But because I'm in Illinois, they were able to postmark it, and I just think that's voter suppression. That's what I was looking for. I think
Yes.
that is something that needs to, you hear about the long lines and everything with, big voting centers. That needs to actually change in the future. I think that's one thing. But I just wanted to bring that up because
Yeah.
we're talking about
I
participation.
definitely agree with that. I know I was talking with one of my friends. They don't go to Ball State. I think they go to UC. They were talking about how in Texas, each, I don't know if it was county or city or what separation it was, but they only had one drop box like for voting. And we were talking about how that's insane because Dallas is huge. One drop box for voting and the entirety of Dallas when last election there was 11. If that's not voter suppression, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
And just like little things like that most people didn't even like know about
Mhm.
because they just kind of like stealthily they're just like, here, let's just do this, but have no media coverage on it. Just don't talk about it. Didn't happen.
Yeah, for real. Um, Kind of shifting towards our campus at Ball State, how would you describe, any issues regarded to race or like race relations on campus?
I definitely feel like compared to some of the campuses around me, we have Miami, Oxford, University of Cincinnati, Ohio State are all like close enough around me that I've been to those campuses and kind of know the atmospheric like tension or vibe, I guess. I definitely think Ball State's not as bad as like Miami, for instance, um, when it comes to race and dealing with race and diversity. I definitely do think that Ball State tries to make themselves seem more diverse than they are. Like you said, the PR we're in. Um, I do, however, know like trying to think of how I want to word this. I definitely think Ball State needs to have like every school, every company, corporation, everything, they have a PR advisor. And I feel like Ball State needs somebody to help advise on how to handle and go about um, discussing events based around race and diversity, like the caravans, like we mentioned in your interview, and the multicultural building not having like any, if at all, public like knowledge on that it's being built, that there's one to begin with, what they do, all that kind of thing. That should be something that the school should be publicizing a lot. Like, look, this is a brand new building. We're building it. We're putting money into it, and these are the activities that we're planning on doing. Obviously, COVID pending. That would be like a great story, but no one knows about it. And with the caravans, they people like students knew what was happening and knew what was going to happen before it happened, and were like telling people like, hey, these people posted on Instagram, we're going to go cause trouble and scare all these quote unquote libtards on Ball State's campus. And like RAs were talking about it. They were sending out messages like, don't go outside at night unless you're in groups. Be careful, be diligent. Like, if you don't have to go out, don't go out. These are where people have said they are. I know there were some car accidents because of it. I heard that someone got hit by a car, but I don't know if that's true or not. And the campus didn't even like send out an emergency notice like, hey, these people are here, we're trying to deal with it. They didn't even send out anything like, we're aware of the situation and we're handling it, or we're trying to, like, they didn't even acknowledge that they knew it was happening until it had been happening for like a weekend already. um, which I think definitely shouldn't have happened like that, especially with something so like, I don't want to say threatening, but threatening.
Yeah.
Like, me and four other girls had to walk to the stadium to walk one of our other friends back to campus because she had to park her car at the stadium because of the caravans.
Mm-hmm.
And because they were targeting women that looked queer. And she is a woman and she looks very queer. And she was scared. She wasn't going to get out of her car until someone was there. And we shouldn't have to like think like that. We shouldn't have to worry about that.
Right.
Because the bus wasn't coming for like another 20 minutes, I think it was. And I definitely think Ball State needs to reevaluate what they're publicizing, what they're not publicizing, and how they handle situations that involve race or gender, sexuality, all of the minority groups, everything. I feel like they don't handle very well.
Mm-hmm. so I'm gonna speak personally here. Like being at Ball State, that's the most diverse like school I've ever been to. But at the same
Mhm.
time, being a college campus that is home to 25,000 plus students, that the fact that it's the most diverse I've ever been to really doesn't mean much in the long run. So like, do you? How have you like navigated like? I feel like this is a weird term, but this is what it has on the interview guide. It says the whiteness at Ball State. Like I get that. Like truly, there's obviously a larger white population than all the others combined. So like, is there something specifically that's like helped you navigate that? Like in terms, like what I would say, what I think about is like the honors college specifically. We've had this conversation within our Zoom classes. Like it's just generally not a diverse place. Like, is there something that you
Yeah.
think can be done about that, or how have you like handled that to begin with at all?
I would say it's definitely a problem for sure. Without knowing like the numbers of like applicants or anything,
Mm-hmm.
I would say, I guess it would depend on if it's not diverse because they're not accepting people into the honors college as much, like people of color as much as white people, or if people of color aren't applying to the honors college. Because whichever one that is, I would suggest a different solution. Obviously, if it's them not accepting them, accept them.
Yeah.
Open it up. Be a little bit like, you don't want to be lenient with anybody, but like, why not accept them?
Mm-hmm.
Why? And if it's people not applying, I would say if it was me, the only reason that I would think not to apply is one, I don't know enough information about it. Um, Two, I don't think that I would get in. Or three, I know it's not diverse and I don't want that. So in that case, I would say they could do a better job of, I don't want to say publicizing the honors college because I do feel like they do that a lot, but how they publicize it.
Yeah.
Like, do a better job of explaining, like, yes, it's an honors class, like, or honors courses, and you'll be in the, like, you'll have more requirements than the average student, but show, like, you don't have to be, like, some genius to do it. The classes aren't too challenging, and it's very doable for people. Um, and I'm trying to think of like how they could reach out. This would be another thing with like a PR advisor that specializes
Yeah,
in
for sure.
race and stuff. If there's like a specific way for them to reach that community and like appeal to them more, to show like, hey, like, yeah, we're not that diverse right now, but we want to be and we are trying to be. And I definitely think this class is a good start, because then if, like me, I was like, I didn't know this was a thing. I never even heard like an anti-racist, like, I've never heard of an anti-racist before
Yeah.
this class. Um, and so to me, them even having this class shows like, hey, we're trying.
Right.
We're providing this course. We're going to add to this course, um, that kind of thing. So definitely like publicizing more of like even some of the class offerings, I think, because I feel like I didn't hear much about any of the honors classes.
Yeah.
It was just like, hey, we'll help you with this, this, and this. So showing like some of the courses and like including this would even appeal, I think, and bring in more people of color into the honors college.
Yeah. With that in mind, this doesn't have to necessarily be about the honors college. It could be about Ball State in general. Do you think just straight up after your first semester on campus, do you think there's a culture of belonging that exists at Ball State for most people, or do you think some people still struggle with that?
I
And
feel
obviously, you can't
like,
speak for everybody, but like in general.
yeah, in general, I definitely think that there is more of a cultural belonging feel. Um, but there's definitely like, I'm friends with a few people of color on campus, and they've made comments too, like they didn't even know about the multicultural building, and that they felt like they were over, I don't want to say overpowered because that's not the word, but like they felt like they were a lot less, I guess,
Yeah.
than like the white students, because they are.
Mhm.
There's definitely more white people on campus. So I feel like yes and no. I feel like the honors college, I don't know.
I feel what you're saying though. Like
Yeah, I was trying to
it's a
think
yes
like,
and no. Like there's obviously
yeah,
restrictions on
because I
both.
know I know some people and they have like their like own, I don't want to say clique, but like kind of
Mhm.
they all hang out all the time and everything. So then like they have where they belong. Um, but as like a whole, I'm not quite sure what that feels like for people.
Kind of a transition to like the wrap up of the interview. We got a couple more questions. So what would you say this class or this course in general has meant to you specifically?
I definitely think it was very important for me. It was one of my favorite classes that I had this fall. It was a class that I looked forward to and I really enjoyed attending. I liked how it was synchronous, so it was every Tuesday, 3:30. And that's just how it was because all my other classes were either asynchronous or hybrid, so they changed every week. And this being like a constant definitely helped um, find some consistency, I guess,
Mhm.
which is important for me. I I don't mind change, but I like schedules.
Yeah.
And then like the topics that we talked about and all of the discussions that we had, and even when Bartlett started doing like the high tea Thursdays, I went to quite a few of those too, and just like being able to do something like that, like talk freely and like without judgment and ask questions without judgment in a class about a topic that I've had questions about and that I've wanted to talk about because I only get one side of this conversation at home, um, really like impacted me personally. And it definitely helped me grow like as an anti-racist and as a person. um, Definitely changed my views on a lot of things. I remember specifically when we were talking about what was it? The history of racism in colleges. So like how Harvard and all of them were built and um, staffed by slaves. Um, when they asked, I don't remember if they like asked it in an article or if it was one of the questions that came up um, for like the discussion, but it was like, what do you think they need to do to like reimburse families for those slaves? And my first initial thought was like, why do they have to?
Mhm.
Like, it's in the past, it is what it is. Like, why does it matter? And then like after discussing, it made me realize like it does.
Yeah.
It's important. Um, and that one just stuck out to me the most because like I genuinely read it and I was like, I don't know, like why do they need to? Which just shows how like my upbringing impacted like why I think certain ways, and being able to essentially just call myself out on it
Yeah.
uh, from this class is going to make me a better person in the long run, especially.
Yeah, for sure. So like moving on, was there anything like in the future, is there anything in this class, like a specific topic or a theme that you'll keep with you and hope to, use in your career path or anything like that?
Definitely microaggressions
Progression.
and knowing what they are, being able to identify them. because I'm going into education and I'm going to be a teacher, having that knowledge is definitely going to help me, one, be a better teacher, and two, allow me to have the education and background knowledge to help instruct my students when and if a situation with a microaggression occurs. Because then I think we even talked about it when we were discussing microaggressions, how teachers uh, they don't really know much about them, or they ignore them, they don't talk about them, and they'll even say things and do things in their class um, that are microaggressions. So being able to know what a microaggression is, identify what one is, and know how to discuss what it is and be able to explain why it's bad to my students is definitely going to help make my class more of a safe place when
Mhm.
I do graduate and get my own classroom and start my career.
Yeah, I get that. So this is kind of like going along with that. You said you want to be a teacher. I just wanted to
Yeah.
get your perspective on this. Do you think in the future it'll be possible to, because I've always had this notion that like, well, I guess I can't say I've always had it. It's kind of been, it was a little bit developed by this class, in fact, but like the curriculum, like your standard middle school, or I'm not sure where, like what age you're trying to teach, but like in general, changing the curriculum to like, we all like as Americans, we kind of tend to idolize these figures. Like in the past, I know like Christopher Columbus, Abraham Lincoln, but at the same time, like from this class, you learn about these people. Like they only did what was necessary to benefit them. Like Lincoln
Oh
only
yeah.
freed the slaves in order to protect the Union. That's what he's quoted as saying, and we just read that in Kennedy's book. But like, do you think it's possible to institute a nationwide change of curriculum like that, or do you think that's even something that should be done?
I definitely think it needs to be done. Um, our history books and all of them are way too whitewashed. They're full of fallacies and or just blatantly removed complete events and ideologies from like our forefathers. Um, I do think if, and I'm going to say if and when, because hopefully it will happen eventually, um, there starts to be a change in these books and how teachers teach about them. I do suspect there's going to be backlash and talking about how it's our history and they're trying to change our history because so many people are ignorant to the fact that the book is wrong. Like, it's not Christopher Columbus found America, it's Christopher Columbus found the land that the Native Americans were on and then slaughtered them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because that part's not like they just say it was colonized. They don't talk about how these people were already here and we killed them.
Yeah.
um, so I do think it needs to happen. I hope that it will eventually. It definitely will have backlash and will probably take a while though.
Yeah. Um, you also had mentioned this in one of your previous answers. I also just wanted to get your take on it. You were talking about the Stephen Smith article that talked about universities and the slave trade.
Yeah.
Um, I was just curious, was that your like favorite resource from all 16 weeks of class? Like, was there anything that stood out besides that to you that you can
Uh,
think
that
of off
was
the top of your head?
definitely that was definitely one of the top ones, specifically because I looked really hard into going to Harvard and one of my uncles works at Harvard. So like I guess I knew that like the older schools and Ivy Leagues were built and founded so long ago that they were built and staffed by people of color and like enslaved people, but I never acknowledged really the fact or thought more about it. So like after reading that source, it really stood out to me like, oh, yeah, that's kind of like why don't they talk about that? Why did they kind of just like hide it under the rug? Um, so that was definitely one of the big ones. I would say my other top one would be the video. I think let me see if I can find it. The video with trying to think of his name, where he's talking about he was Indian.
Oh yeah, I like that one a lot too. That was Hassan Minhaj,
Yes, that one.
the Patriot
Um,
Act.
yeah, that definitely was a big one for me as well. Um, just because one, I like how he presented it. He was being both professional and kind of snarky, which I found, I don't want to necessarily say entertaining, but when people are like explaining serious topics and they make like a hyperbole of the situation to show just how ridiculous it really is, it to me is like it comes across perfectly and makes you realize like, yeah, that's kind of insane. That's not, that
Mhm.
makes no sense when you put it like that. And I like how he presented um, all of the facts and everything, and was basically saying like, yeah, y'all are kind of ignorant.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, that was probably my favorite video resource. I think my favorite article. It's hard to say, but I liked the one that talked about the history of Muncie, just because I
Hmm.
really didn't know, and I thought it was interesting. I go to school there, so I thought like that one was important for me. Like I didn't like seeing the picture of the KKK in Muncie back in 19, I think it was 1923. Like that is never would have guessed. Like no idea that took place there, and it's kind of like wow, well, okay. So
Yeah.
that's what I would say for mine. Kind of wrapping it up. I think this is like the big, you know, big picture question. What do you think it means to be an anti-racist?
I think being an anti-racist means actively trying to fight racism as well as spreading the knowledge and like I guess facts about situations and being able to not necessarily combat racism because sometimes it's just going to be a never ending cycle of you trying to debate and argue with somebody who will not change. They're too stubborn, they're hard-headed, they're not going to change their ideas. But being able to recognize and change and like live afterwards thinking in an anti-racist way. So like how I mentioned, I didn't think that the colleges like Harvard should do anything. After the class, I realized, well, that's incorrect. These people were enslaved and they were forced to do all this work. Their families deserve to be given justice, I guess is the word I would say. So I was able to identify, like, hey, that's not a good thought. Changed my thought, and now I can keep living and know, like, that I can identify that. I know it's wrong and be able to share that with other people.
Yeah, I like that take. Sorry, my email just popped up randomly. I don't like that. All right. I guess the last thing I would ask is, was there any other like comments or things you wanted to like just put out there before we wrapped it up?
Um, Not that I can really think of.
No, I think we did pretty good on time. This was a good conversation to have. I'm glad. This is an interesting take on like a final project. I kind of
Yeah.
especially when every week you're sitting in front of a camera with like 20, I think it's like 25 other students. Just to have that one-on-one is a little nice. I was way more comfortable talking about things than I ever would have been,
Oh, yeah.
in class settings. Like I actually enjoyed this way more than I thought I would. So I hope you did too.
Yeah, I did.
All right, good. I think we're done then. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll see you in class later.
See ya.